Hello and welcome to this episode of ACL Wise, and this time we've got a special guest, Claire Minshull, who is a huge proponent of strengthening and conditioning in the rehab space and doing it well, and we're going to get her insights on everything to do with ACL, potentially a bit about injury risk, but also a bit about rehabbing people and how are we doing it. So let's crack on. Right, so Claire, welcome.
Tom, thank you.
This is a little, fairly insignificant podcast about ACL injuries, but
well, you've got the right guess then.
well, we can share those minor ambitions. No, but this is a podcast, like I mentioned before, around ACL injuries, everything to do with ACL prevention, rehab. Stuff. People are interested in the rehab area, regardless of the type of clinician they are, whether they're a physio or a rehabilitator or a medic. If they have an interest in ACLs, but life's busy, we want them to have a really good source of information. And I really love chatting to people who have a passion about this area. And I know you have passions in many things, but I know this is something you have a good chunk of experience in. And I grabbed you because I thought, right, I need your opinion on things, and just to get some insights. So just to kick things off, for people who, many of the people who would watch this would know who you are, but for people who don't, tell us about who you are and how you ended up in this space with any reference towards ACL.
Okay, so my academic career, I suppose, probably started from a research perspective, with a PhD that was primarily focused on ACL. And if I told you I defended my Viva in January 2004, you know how long ago that is. At that time, I suppose there's a real drive and to want to understand why there's this kind of epidemic of ACL injury, and then there's also, as there still is currently, this magnifying glass or lens over females who are increased susceptibility at that time, given equivalent exposure to sport, etc. So trying to think and understand what the mechanisms of injury were, what the injury risk factors might be, and then how we might seek to improve those neuromuscular characteristics. I was looking at the neuromuscular characteristics. Can't really do much about notch width and ACL size, etc., or Q angle, but we can modify some of the neuromuscular, musculoskeletal components. So my PhD was focused on, it's a prospective randomized control trial study that sought to enhance aspects of speed of muscle activation, which was highly novel for the time because we're only now just starting to talk about rate of force development and switch on times of muscles. Now it started out like that, but as perhaps many people who've done a PhD will tell you, it's not a smooth process unless you're in a lab and you're given some petri dishes and you go through this process. So what happened was I did it.
Evolve a bit.
It evolved, and then I kind of 2 years through, I lost funding. The company that was sponsoring me went bust, which was set up as an injury prevention centre as well. There's a big story there. Anyway, I'd done 2 years of study, so that what it actually meant was I couldn't do the prospective randomised control trial. So I had to design some other experiments that would test these, I suppose, the threats to neuromuscular performance and thus potentially stability in a kind of a different type of model. That being said, we still latterly introduced these exercise components into the ACL rehabilitation program that is where I studied. So that's the IJH Orthopaedic Hospital in Oswestry. Still got very strong links there and got a good research linkage too. So that's where my ACL interest started. Then, about 18 months into it, I ruptured my own to get pure empathy with those people that I was studying, and then we kind of continued the research and kind of evaluated those aspects of performance that I've just mentioned from a different perspectives, trying to better understand injury risk, thinking about injury prevention, the holy grail, and then something that we absolutely need to, because we're bought into it, the rehabilitation process, because the injury's already happened, and we want to try and best rehabilitate them, return to sport and or activities without succumbing to a second injury.
So your PhD had big, I mean, a long time ago, like you said, but it had big scope, as in huge sort of broad-ranging themes, which are massively, like you said, have been really tricky to understand and pick apart over the years. But what have you learned in terms of, let's take, for example, modifiable risk factors? Some of the stuff that the work that we do with Power Up to Play that I've been involved in has been looking at these prevention programs, essentially, you know, 10 minutes of blasting up and doing different movements and things like that. What is it, do you think, from your experience and also from your PhD, if that informed your opinion on this, if it hasn't changed over the years since then, is making the difference with those programs? Why is there such a big reduction in, because this draws back to this question around neuromuscular control, and I've just trying to try and make sure that I and everyone else has understood that correctly. So strength is like how much force a muscle can exert, right?
Yeah, so we've got several elements in neuromuscular performance. You've got so the basic fundamental ones, I suppose, that you can measure without too much paraphernalia. You've got muscular strength, which is the maximal contractile force a muscle or group can elicit in a single contraction, regardless of who you are. You've got the rate of force development, so how you get there, the early phase, the rate phase, rapidity of muscle force production, the steepness of that force time curve. You've also got the switch on times of the musculature, something called electromechanical delay. Don't really need to remember that, but what you do need to know is that physiologic factors influence at the muscle site the speed by which muscle force is initiated. So there's a delay between once you see the EMG in the muscle to then the first registration of muscle force, and that's influenced by contractile and non-contractile factors. And then you've got proprioceptive acuity. It's interesting because 1996 actually, Carafa, I think, was the first study with prospective randomized controlled trial in sport that looked at ACL injury prevention, and that was basically wobble board training. And why we don't have a massive amount of data in this space is because prospective randomized controlled trials that survey injury incidents are huge undertaking from a logistic perspective, but also financially. You need massive amounts of people over a long period of time, and then you need to be able to assess things very, very accurately. So
try and control the variables, which is difficult.
Indeed. So when you ask about what are those things that have changed with these prophylactic interventions, you ultimately don't know unless you're testing them. So it could be, the fact that their proprioceptive acuity is improved. It could be that actually doing some extra training, albeit lower intensity, but if you times it over weeks and months, a higher volume of training has had an element of conditioning. It could be all sorts of other factors as well. We don't know, because to try, to attribute some of that causality or make some inference, should I say, you'd need to measure things like strength, rate of force development, or the variable of interest on all of those players or those participants over time.
This is a slightly fraught exercise to try and control the variables to know which bit is having an effect.
It is, and that's why we've not solved the equation, we've not solved the problem. I was just having a chat there with a really great friend and colleague of mine, Kirsty Elliott-Sale, Professor MMU, set up the women's health centre. We were just having this discussion about females, ACL injury risk and incidence. That's all in the headlines now, that we've got a fantastic spotlight on women's sport participation. We haven't solved that problem. It's multifactorial. But it doesn't mean that the exercise to prevent is futile. We need to try and better understand what's going on. And that's why, because it's so multifactorial, we've not solved this problem yet.
So in terms of like getting things down to idiot language, I think most people get what proprioception is. So if I use the analogy of a brass section in an orchestra,
okay, let's go with that.
If your quads is the trumpet, how loud the trumpeter can play is your strength. Your kind of how quickly it fires is how sleepy the trumpeter is. Wake up. You've got to play the note on time. There can't be a delay. And then maybe neuromuscular control perhaps would be how good the brass section sounds together.
Or the conductor.
How good the conductor is. Okay.
So you're thinking about proprioceptive acuity, the basic language of that is kind of like balance, your response to perturbations. And if you think about a progressive program to improve that, it might be starting or something very simplistic where you're standing on one leg, and you're trying to maintain balance. You then reduce the sensory inputs or make the challenge harder by changing the surface, close the eyes, add perturbation. And what you're trying to do is change this conscious response to something that's a pre-programmed pre-programmed fed forward program held at more of the spinal cord level rather than it's involving the conscious decision making.
This is hard for scientists and researchers when I do this, but if I was to remove any requirement for scientific rigor or analysis, and if I was asking you just for your gut feel, what is the Claire Minshull gut feel on if I did to pin you down to one thing that you think is having the biggest impact on, let's say, dynamic knee valgus, for example, or let's say the incident where someone...
Is it knee valgus that's the main program?
Okay.
Or is it anterior tibial translation? Is it muscle fatigue? Is it a improper conditioning of the hamstring musculature?
We know that there is a link between muscle fatigue and the increased incidence of dynamic knee valgus, but whether dynamic knee valgus is the actual trigger, it seems to have an association in like retrospective video analysis and so on from some of the studies.
And this is the thing, it's all association, because I've yet to get a study through ethics that intentionally injures people. I can't understand why. So a lot of this is hypothesis generating. It's looking back retrospectively at data.
And that's why I say, let's for a minute, let's just play with the idea of going, just to humour the exercise. No scientific evidence for this, but what's your gut feel on what is the thing? Let's go back, for example, the one thing we know of that I think pretty much everyone agrees on, because there's irrefutable evidence behind the fact that neuromuscular programs, done 10, 15 minutes once or twice a week, massively drop people's ACL risk. And why might that be?
If there is an influence, I don't know. If there is an influence, it depends who's doing the program and who's not doing the program. What are the studies that compare those that haven't, that have? What are the characteristics of those participants? Are they adolescents? Are they kind of females who have had, by comparison to male counterparts, less exposure to volume and quality of training? I don't think there's a single answer to that, but what is happening is there is an additional stimulus that's provided over and above what they are already receiving. And if you look at the components of some of them, it might involve some hitherto unincorporated reactive exercises, rapidity of directional change, rapidity of muscle activation and rebounding, and that should, elements of that should be incorporated into the historically athletes' training. But if it's not, if you're looking at the disparity of exposure of males versus females, for example, then you could posit that actually maybe it's having an effect because just they've never done that type of work before. Whether that is the thing, whether it is that they, at a physiologic level, you've got better recruitment, synchrony of firing of fast twitch motor units, maybe so, but that's never been evaluated.
No.
We don't know. So it's possibly having an effect, but I do wonder if there's other things that we could be doing that's better. Or pragmatically, what can you incorporate en masse?
Yeah, sure.
Well, that's then a different question, and you kind of boiling it down to something that lots of people can do at the same time, and it doesn't require that much extra
I take your point, because what you're arguing is essentially that when you're comparing a neuromuscular injury prevention program like the PEP or the 11 plus or
and why do we call it neuromuscular? What does neuromuscular? So I'm a neuromuscular physiologist, actually.
Yeah, right.
Neuromuscular physiology is about the neuromuscular system. We've got terminology. The things that we talk about neuromuscular physiology involve things like electromechanical delay, involve talking about propagation of action potentials, involve stimulating muscle and understanding the function and the performance characteristics of the musculature.
Right.
Neuromuscular type training, when I started my PhD, was more of this perturbation type exercise. Now we've got a neuromuscular training program that involves maybe some sprinting, maybe a little bit of this, maybe a little bit of that. Exactly, yeah. I mean, anything by that basis could be neuromuscular, couldn't it?
I guess your point, they're all predictable movements and they're all planned movements. None of them are an unexpected stimuli. So I guess from a neuromuscular perspective, they're quite basic. They're not exactly,
if you're thinking
there's
about
no perturbation.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And in the Huang study in 2022, I think, found that there was about a 53% reduction in ACL injury risk if the program that you're delivering has the four main components of hopping up and down, jumping, a direction change, running, and that was quite a big meta-analysis. But I think my throwback question would be then, as someone who knows more about this neuromuscular stuff, if it isn't particularly advanced neuromuscular training that these programs that we mentioned just now are doing, then what is it? What is the effect we're seeing then? Is it just the conditioning? If we just get them stronger?
That's what I'm saying. It depends who you're talking about. Who's doing the training, what type of training is it, and what's their training and exercise history.
Are they elite? Are they really deconditioned?
Exactly. So if you think about the had they not been exposed to anything like that before, it's a novel stimulus. It'll cause some adaptation. If they were to do, I imagine, if you think about just the basics of physiology, you provide a stimulus that's challenging or presents some sort of overload, the body will adapt. And if we're talking about positive change here, thinking about improving muscle response times, rate of force development. Now, if you keep that intensity of stimulus the same over a prolonged period of time, it will no longer represent the same level of challenge.
No, sure.
So you're likely to see that's why exercise programs have progressed, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's why,
I think from a rehab point of view, I completely agree. But my understanding, I might be wrong here, but I think there are some studies that have looked into sustained injury reduction risk over time, a year or more, when they've kept up doing the program once or twice a week.
I'd have to go back and check that later.
I hope I'm not misquoting there, but that the program had changed. They're just doing the same bog standard program, but they're doing it regularly enough to see sustained reduced injury risk.
And then, as I said, I need to have a look at those data to make a bit more of a detailed and sensible commentary on it. But that might be enough to cause the adaptation to influence some level of injury risk susceptibility. If you keep doing that same thing, doesn't mean it's not going to maintain. It just won't continually progress.
You won't see more adaptation, will you?
Yeah,
No,
right.
sure.
Because it's doing the same thing that you've always done, right? So you become very good at doing that. When the risks or the physical demands outweigh your capabilities, that's when the demands are much higher. Your speed of muscle response, there's force of muscle response, your proprioceptive kind of training that's coming that means you've got already a pre-programmed motor response elicited. All these things become proportionally more important. The levelness of potentially fatigue. We can't say any of these things for certain because there is no causality.
No.
But if we look at the characteristics, as I said, prospectively, retrospectively, during exercise stress tests that are acute, that are prolonged, that represent what people might be doing on the field, you see these changes that you could then make these hypotheses that these things have a role to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in summary, it's notoriously difficult to study accurately because there's so many variables. And even just physiologically, not like behaviourally, on a physiological level, you just said about the brass band. There are several factors about how the brass band play that affect the sound that you hear, and the same with the muscles. How they fire, when they fire, and how they combine together has an effect on the stability of that joint.
Absolutely, yeah, it certainly does.
And I think some of your PhD work was looking into joint stability around the knee in particular. So I guess your point is, very difficult to study. We don't really know a causal relationship with the ACL risk. We have correlations, and that's as good as we got right now.
And I think just to see as well, the way that this is developing, so hopefully the listeners can take away something from what I'm saying. I think it's important to look at your rehabilitation with specific lenses. What is it that you're specifically trying to change? We've already talked about proprioceptive acuity, easy for me to say, strength, rate of force development. All these things require a different specificity of training, which is really important to introduce and also progress. Now we've got, decades later, since starting my PhD, volumes of data now on rate of force development capabilities of individuals that have sustained ACL injury and have gone through rehabilitation programs. And we used to talk about this, and we still do, interlimb asymmetry. Don't get me started on ratio data. We can talk about that on another podcast. But we've got this 90 or 95% symmetry that we need to achieve as a part of a decision-making process to go back to sport. So the injured leg being 90 or 95% as strong as the other limb.
So Kate Webster did some stuff on this in Australia.
Right.
Yeah.
But we lose, with ratio data, we don't know how absolutely strong people are. So it's important to look at the level pre and post as well, because you find that also a non-injured limb declines in performance too over time.
Yes.
But also what we are now seeing with the RFD data is we've got a volume enough rate of force development data. So the rapidity of force generation. How long does it take to rupture ACL? Somewhere between 300 to 50 milliseconds. That's like a third of a second to even a minuscule amount. So we need rapid neuromuscular responses that are forceful to dynamically stabilize a joint, to harness those noxious forces. This RFD data now is showing actually this interlimb asymmetry in RFD performance might exceed that we see of strength performance. And we think that strength, there's certainly some data that improper or deficits of strength data down the line might be a precursor to a second injury or a different type of injury. The deficits that we're seeing in rate of force development are even greater. So the differences between them are even greater. And that might be...
For someone who has good symmetry and strength, is that what you're saying?
No, independently of strength.
Right.
So you look at, we might have a strength deficit, and if a strength deficit, by comparison to the non-injured limb, if that strength deficit confers an increased injury risk, and your strength deficit is, 20%, let's say. Yeah. Actually, if we look at the similar data, obviously not in the same people, but down the line, now we've got meta-analyses of these data that show actually that 20% for RFD at the same time point might be 30%. It might last for 4 years beyond. So we're carrying these reduced temporal deficits in force generation, which, if we understand the mechanisms of injury and rapidity of injury, these things can be really important, actually, in properly, inverted commas, or should I say, enhancing rehabilitation such that we're reducing injury risk. Maybe it's not just the strength; it's actually a really important.
I think I've seen
RFD
some data on this with the curve on force plates and how quickly the force is generated.
That's correct. That's on ground reaction force I'm talking about, but that's the similar principle. So yeah, it's the slope of that force time curve.
And the asymmetry between the two limbs can go on for many years after they've ticked all their boxes, their rehab boxes.
Well, absolutely, because people don't measure it, and it's a very it's a variable index. So it's really difficult to measure. You've got to be good at measurement. You've got to have the right kit with the fast enough sampling frequency. But I'm pleased to say that now we've got enough data generated by 8 labs and good techniques and quality data to pool and look at this from a bigger perspective on a meta-analytic scale that show actually these deficits exist in RFD, and actually they might be greater than we're seeing in strength, which is hopefully focusing down the line a bit more focus on, from the rehab perspective, onto this explosive force production en masse, I hope.
So you're thinking, we should be thinking a little bit less, well, not just about how loudly the trumpet can play, but how awake the guy is to hit the note on time.
I don't know which bit the RFD is in your trumpeter, but yes.
A sleepy trumpeter.
Maybe
he's
it's
not
the
going to
key
have the
pressing.
rate of switching on and playing his note. That's my silly analogy. But in that really simplified, non-scientific analogy, that how quickly you can generate force.
Yeah.
Because of the point you're making about injuries can happen like that.
Yeah.
The stabilizers can kick in around that joint. It would seem that that's an important variable, and with these new data that are going to be coming in on a large enough scale to be able to extrapolate properly, you're excited that could then change rehab practice.
I'm excited because what I've always thought for decades, I'm not saying I'm right, but colleagues and the scientific community is now able to shout a little bit more louder about these other indices of performance that might well play a role, which might then, it might be entirely wrong, of course, don't listen to me, but might, change a little bit the rehabilitation. So you've got the reactive stuff. We saw yesterday sprint and acceleration, but what about loaded force production rapidly? Of your hamstring muscles, major dynamic protector of the ACL. Are we doing enough of that? Yeah. Makes me wonder.
Yeah. So one thing then, people listening, probably low-tech environments, many of them, some lucky enough to be in high-tech environments, have force plates and isokinetic machines and so on. What's if they go, great, Claire, lovely. I like the way you're thinking about this, but what do I do on a Monday morning when I've got my rehab patient who's end stage ACL rehab, and I want to try and be as good as I can be with the circumstances I have and the limited kit I have? What would your answer be?
From what, an assessment perspective or a training perspective?
From a training perspective.
So the key difference between strength and rate of force development type training is explosiveness. Yeah. The intent to move, lift, push, pull with maximum intent. Yeah. That's the key. You can go more specific than that, absolutely you can. You can train different phases of the force time curve, but that's the key difference. You can manipulate load, you can do resistance, you can do isometric to start out with, you can do ballistic, you can do machine-based stuff. All of those are really good starting points when clinically appropriate. But as I said, you can start isometrically.
Yeah, because of the crossover. You can start asymmetrically.
Isometrically.
Isometrically,
yeah.
Brilliant. So a couple of takeaway points then that people can immediately start thinking about is, okay, we may not have the full picture on injury causation, and it's complex, and studying that's going to continue being challenging for the next 20 years, not that in the last 20 years. That we agree on. But it would seem plausible that neuromuscular control, rate of force development, proprioceptive acuity, these are the sorts of things that are likely to be influencing people's primary injury rate for ACL and secondary. After they've had one, they're more likely to have another one on either limb. So your point here is, we should be as good as we can possibly be in rehabbing people, and at the very least bringing in ballistics, explosiveness into the rehab process.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, and the relative importance of that will be great in some more than others, depending on physiologically what they look like, biomechanically what they're like, anatomically what they're like, and also importantly what they're going back to. Are they going back to a demand which is quite a sport or an environment which is quite chaotic, lots of high stresses and strains and unpredictability, or actually is it less important because they're not a sports person and they've got less demands, in which case the relative importance of that is probably slightly less.
Yeah, so the need for chaos will be less in their rehab process. Last question, I know you're short on time. I ask this question to everybody. If there's one thing, and I'll hold you to one, if there's one thing that you would like to see in the UK in the coming years within the ACL space, what would it be?
In the ACL space, do you know what? I think I'll extend it. So I want to see rehab gyms. If I could afford to do it myself, we would have them. We'd have the Minshull method out there in the community. We need spaces where people can go to do rehabilitation. Now, my passion actually is a lot more about osteoarthritis and doing all of these things with individuals with age-related joint pain, and they need environments that they can go to do that. We don't cater for them, but that's not to say other people who can't afford elite care, who can't afford the strength and conditioning facilities to rehabilitate their ACL shouldn't be afforded that. So let's say rehabilitation gyms with appropriately upskilled staff and support to help people.
Ballistics and some explosive stuff. Yes. So let's rearrange our cement. Great stuff. Thanks for your time. And we'll let you shoot off, but it's been really interesting to chat to you and learn more about you and your work and everything. So I'm sure our paths will cross again in the future. But that was this session of ACL Wise. Thanks for being with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That's what we say if you want to see more of this kind of content. And we'll see you in the next episode.